It is 3 minutes after 10 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where look, should we get the big stuff out there first? It is politically very effective to be a massive racist. Anybody in any doubt at all about that has not noticed Donald Trump, who offers pretty much nothing to the American people except permission to be vile again, permission to resurrect all of the prejudices and all of the bigotries that the civil rights movement had done and has done so much for so many years to diffuse and dilute. And it never goes away. The invitation to hate is always irresistible to some people. It's hard to pin down exactly how many. You're going to get 10 to 15% of any electorate who will prioritise racism or prioritise abuse of foreigners, abuse of expats or immigrants, or whatever word you prefer, even and up to and including refugees. That invitation will always be irresistible to a section of the population. And in the hands of a skilled operator, and I don't really know what the skills are, but you know the difference, for example, between a Nigel Farage and a Nick Griffin, in the hands of a skilled operator, it will move beyond that 10 to 15%. And then you get some insidious truths that are always ignored by proponents of this kind of prejudice, that it is, for example, a working class concern, that the working class are racist and it is important to speak up for them, which is something you will be routinely told by middle and upper class racists who are lying, because the other crucial constituent of racism is lies. It is always lies, because what you are doing is imposing a hierarchy of humanity according to completely negligible differeces, according to things that do not make a difference to your value as a human being, but you must pretend that they do. In fact, one of the people on the sort of letterhead at the so-called think tank to which Suicidal Braverman elected to give this speech yesterday is a eugenicist, someone that tries to impose some sort of intellectual rationale upon racism, and that is something that you see happen quite a lot from people absolutely furious about being called racist while espousing racism. That's the only thing that saves us really from the abyss in this country, is that people didn't take Steve Bannon's advice and start wearing their racism proudly on their lapel. Although yesterday, the Home Secretary, herself of course a woman of colour and the child of migrants, came perilously close to doing what Steve Bannon told them to do in the aftermath of the Brexit vote, and wearing racism proudly on her lapel, because she talked about people as if there is an effective hierarchy of humanity, as if where you come from or your access to or right to everything from education to hospital treatment is in some sense determined by where you were born or where your parents were born. What's very odd about it, what's very difficult about it intellectually and emotionally, is the fact that for many people that might subscribe to her bogus notion of human hierarchy, she would be, and her parents would be considered inferior. That's the mad thing. So the critics of Suella Braverman, and I am one of them, have to argue that she is every bit as welcome here and as valid a contributor to British society as I am. That's what her critics have to argue. Her critics have to defend her from the accusations of inferiority that will be levelled at her by people to whom she seeks to appeal with this rhetoric. That's the bit I can't quite get my head around. I mean, listen, it's got nothing to do with her skin colour. It's got to do with her family history of immigration. So Dominic Raab, for example, is the son of a refugee as well, and arrived at some pretty grim opinions about how refugees should be treated. So it's not about that. It's very simply about what the people she's appealing to think of people like her family. Because if you're not imposing a hierarchy of humanity, what are you doing? And that's where the comments about multiculturalism become incomprehensible to me. Incomprehensible to me. The idea that the so-called multiculturalism, which I take to mean lots of people from different backgrounds and with different beliefs muddling along together and getting on pretty well. All of the statistical evidence is that the word that is generally used is integration is better or faster or at higher levels than it has ever been before. The idea that this woman in particular can stand up and say that multiculturalism has failed when she is a walking, talking exemplar of its success, isn't she? I mean, isn't that the point? Isn't the point that she, as the Home Secretary, the daughter, I think, of South Goan Indians who came here via Mauritius and Kenya, respectively, serves as Home Secretary in the cabinet of a Hindu Prime Minister whose parents also emigrated here from a former colony, from overseas? That to me is a fairly potent argument that she is proof that multiculturalism has succeeded. And that's where it gets mad for the Tories as well, because they point to people like Suella Braverman, quite rightly, and people like Dominic Raab, and people like Rishi Sunak, and people like James Cleverly, and people like Priti Patel. I'll stop doing that thing with my voice now. I don't want to set your car alarm off. As proof, I don't think it's a powerful argument that it proves racism is not in place, or it proves racism is in abeyance. Wherever you're from and whatever you look like, if you say things that racists like, they're going to look a little bit more kindly upon you than if you call them out for what they are. But they are walking, talking proof, surely, of the success of multiculturalism. Hugo Rifkin, the Times columnist, puts it brilliantly. It's remarkable to hear Braverman say multiculturalism has failed. She's a British Home Secretary descended from Goan Indians from Mauritius and Kenya, married to a Jewish husband in a government headed by Britain's first Hindu Prime Minister. What would successful multiculturalism look like? And Satnam Sanghera, his colleague at the Times and the author of Empireland, goes a little further. He says it was only a matter of time before one of the brown Tories vying for leadership claimed that multiculturalism has failed. This is not related to any kind of reality. It's about campaigning to be leader, making the party's mostly white, often extremely right-wing members feel like it's okay to spout this nonsense. He doesn't use the word nonsense. He is a little more Anglo-Saxon in his expressions. So those are the facts. Those are the facts. You have, and I think this is a description we will return to in the course of the morning's programme because it's powerful, right? It's resonant. A British Home Secretary descended from Goan Indians from Mauritius and Kenya, married to a Jewish husband in a government headed by Britain's first Hindu Prime Minister, himself the son of immigrants, says that multiculturalism has failed. What is she talking about? 0345 6060 973. And I don't mean that in a rhetorical way. I don't mean that in a what is she talking about in a sort of Susan Hall or Nadine Dorries kind of way. I mean that in a what is she talking about? 0345 6060 973. What does she mean? Why is she doing this? And I'm going to use that phrase because it seems to me to be absolutely pertinent to the questions that I'm asking you. A Home Secretary descended... I mean, Enoch Powell, who popped up somewhat unexpectedly in Nick's programme earlier, given that the Conservative candidate to be Mayor of London has sort of publicly demonstrated her admiration of one of the most famous British racists of the last 100 years. Enoch Powell was talking about people like Suella Braverman's parents when he gave his Rivers of Blood speech. And here she is, apparently echoing some of his thoughts. And I actually, I do this for a living, and it means you grow a weird carapace. Do you know what I mean? The microphone is in front of me. This is authentic. I talk to you from the heart every day, but it's also my job. So you slip into almost autopilot sometimes. And one of the oddest things about the job is that sometimes a story, the first reaction you have to a story is, oh, that'll be good for talking about tomorrow. You don't lose your humanity, of course, but you lose the rawness of reaction. And sometimes it's not until I hear your voice in the morning that the rawness of my reaction to a story kicks in properly. But this one kicked in immediately. This is horrible stuff. This is really horrible stuff. You can trace what Suella Braverman said in America yesterday right back to the decision by media owners and others to allow Nigel Farage into the public space and to roll out red carpets for him from the BBC down. You can trace it all back to that. And there's misogyny and homophobia in there as well. You can't offer up asylum to people who will be persecuted for their sexuality. A grand total, I think, of just over 400 people received asylum or were offered asylum in part because of the persecution they would receive. People get thrown off buildings in some countries for being gay. They get jailed, And so the racism and the misogyny and the homophobia, they go hand in hand. And it's horrible to see it in the public space at this level of government. Dawn Butler, the Labour MP, suggested to me some time ago that a white politician couldn't or wouldn't say some of the stuff that Suella Braverman says. It was a controversial comment that I'm not 100% comfortable with as a white person. I don't know that I could make that claim, make that point, because it flirts, doesn't it, with the idea that somebody's skin colour should determine what they can and can't say. And that's obviously a fairly horrible conclusion. But the baldness of yesterday's statements, which I think have more to do with the next battle to be Conservative leader than they do with anything else, they are stunning to me. Stunning and deeply, deeply saddening. Because it's a beast that can never be sated. You could, as I suspect she will call for soon, you could reduce immigration into this country to tiny numbers. And you would then turn upon people like her, you see, people whose parents came here. So you stop people coming here. That doesn't feed the appetite of that 10, 15%, that sort of what you might call that Faragist rump. There's nothing you can do to quell those hatreds because they are deep and they are ancient. They are defining for some people. It is part of their personality. Without it, they have nothing. Twitter has been a wonderful introduction for some of us to just how deep these bigotries and biases go. It's all they are. It's all they have. It's who they are. And they don't turn that off when immigration comes down to 50,000 or 20,000 or nil. It's still there. They just turn it on somebody else. And it won't always be race, which is why misogyny and homophobia always go hand in hand with these sort of outcomes. So what is she talking about? Honestly. 0345 606 0973. A British Home Secretary descended from Goan Indians from Mauritius and Kenya, married to a Jewish husband in a government headed by Britain's first Hindu Prime Minister, himself the son of immigrants, is telling you that multiculturalism has failed. Why? 0345 6060 973. 20 minutes after 10 is the time. It's a sad day, isn't it? Because you might have thought, as I did for 10 minutes, that if there was a silver lining to the Brexit vote, then it would be the fact that the racists got what they want, so maybe they'll be quiet for a while. But immigration itself is higher than it's ever been. Net immigration is higher than it's ever been. And the small boats so-called crisis continues to animate sections of the media and the political establishment. And now the Home Secretary has waded bizarrely, but quite cynically, into the heart of this this filth by giving a speech in which she suggests immigration is a threat to the West, an existential threat to the West. And she does so, of course, from the perspective of being a beneficiary of immigration from the East to the West. So what's she up to? Philip's on the Wirral. Philip, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
Thanks
mate.
very much for having me on. So my wife's from a very similar background to Suella. So my wife's Goan heritage. So
Right.
her mum and dad came over to the UK in the late 70s, and my wife and my brother-in-law are obviously their offspring. And now our doctors and a teacher in the UK.
Yes.
My wife grew up in Essex and experienced all sorts of racism, constantly called the P word, even though she's not even from Pakistan. She
Of
was
course.
terrible stories. And unfortunately, when my father-in-law died, even a few days after that, their door got kicked in Essex by thugs, basically racist thugs. This was only about 10 years ago.
Right.
But I met my wife at university. We fell in love. We've got 3 beautiful mixed light brown girls, which we love very much, and hopefully they will contribute towards our country in the future. And so this, for me, is purely about racism. It's appealing to that horrible fraction of, I don't know whether a political party, but that horrible fraction of our society that believes that the problem in society is not the poor sods, blaming the poor sods that come over here on dinghies because they're forced to. There's no other safe routes. They always want to blame them rather than the people in posh suits that are, getting massive PPE contracts and always creaming off the top. Suella, to me, is like, and I'll go to a film classic, which you may or may not know, James, but have you ever seen Django Unchained?
I have, yes, I have. Go on, where are you going with this?
Yeah, so the guy in Django Unchained that works with Leonardo DiCaprio, the black man, that the head of their house, basically. My wife and I were talking about this. Like, Suella, to me, and her seems like that character. He basically made those horrible people in that film, the white people that were enslaving people, torturing people, etc., feel comfortable about being as racist as they wanted to do. He enabled it. He promoted it even in some ways. And at the end of the film, not to spoil it for anybody, but he gets his comeuppance.
I understand the point that you're making, and I think given that this is a conversation you had with your wife, who is herself of Goan heritage, it's a pertinent point to make. But 13 years her party have been in power. It's an attack upon that record as well, isn't it? It's so. I understand what you're saying about PPE. It's not either or, though, is it? I mean, I don't know that this diffuses anger directed at plutocrats. It lives in and of itself. Do you see? Do you follow what I'm saying? It's not. Why is she doing it to distract attention from plutocrats and PPE con men? She's not doing it for that reason. I know that's not what you're suggesting. Yeah, no. It feels like it's trying to enrage the archetypal, as you mentioned on your show before, the archetypal Colin from Portsmouth that's going to get really angry. Really, this is terrible. We're being taken advantage of. We shouldn't be looking after these people. We should be looking after our own. And then, of course, when the doctors and nurses, etc., want pay rises, they're like, we don't want to give them a pay rise. We don't want to look after our own either. I mean, yes, and around we go again. Philip, thank you. Obviously, an awful lot of people keen to contribute to this conversation, so you'll forgive me for moving on. I'd mention briefly in passing, though, that in Greece they are putting huge numbers, as of today, I think, putting huge numbers of undocumented migrants to work because of massive labour shortages, building, I think, a new airport on Crete and other infrastructure projects. So there's an alternative reading of perhaps how you cope with what Suella Braverman sees as problems. Thank you. Rakesh is in St. Leonard's. Rakesh, what would you like to say? What is she talking about?
From my point of view, good to talk to you, by the James. The way, especially in because I'm a British Asian, I've seen it in my own community with regards to how you get very sort of aspirational Indians who once they establish themselves to a point, it's almost like the ladder gets pulled up. I've even heard some of my elders talk about what it's like going back to India, and they kind of really rubbish India, and they call them freshies, basically.
Right.
So it has this really sort of derogatory way of building a hierarchy, as it were. I think. So the way she's pitching herself, it's almost like othering ourselves away from sort of Muslims or the people coming here on the boats.
Right.
So there is this kind of building and fitting into this structure, which stems from back in colonial days. So when her family managed to establish themselves in, as you said, was it Goa and then of Kenyan origin?
Yeah, I think one parent from Mauritius, one parent from Kenya, but rooted in South Goa, I think.
Yeah, so it's almost like they took on board this sort of British colonial way of doing things, and they've just carried that on. So because they're sort of like 2 or 3 generations removed now, I mean, a couple sort of built into this, I'm reading about how intergenerational trauma affects further on down the line. And if you have a look at some of the stuff that I'm reading about online, it does pass down through different ethnic backgrounds. So you've got, the Jewish, you've got the Indians, and then you've got sort of black histories as well.
Yes.
And they're all sort of affected in very different ways. And I think what she's spouting is almost like her parents' pain, and it's the same with Priti Patel as well.
Right. I mean, this is the curse of the liberal, isn't it? Is that's a sympathetic reading. Yeah. It makes you feel sorry for someone, even as the bile comes out of the mouth. My therapist once said to me, Rakesh, if you point a finger at someone, there are 3 fingers pointing back at you, and that I don't know why that just came into my mind when you said that. No,
it does, which is exactly what I'm going through. I'm going through my own counselling as well, and I'm looking at how I'm looking at a way. I'm looking at my. It's difficult to describe. I'm looking at my parents in a way which is sympathetic rather than blaming them, because you just think, how far does this go back? So they were brought up in such a way where they didn't really have a way to articulate what was going on. So it's just now that we've found, through various research in mental health, how we can sort of pinpoint these traumas. And I think also
It's beautifully put. Thank you. No, thank you.
It's something that I've been really kind of processing. Well,
clearly you're living it. That's why you speak with such authenticity, I think. So what does she mean when she says multiculturalism has failed?
I think she's highlighting because it's almost like a brownwashing. So she's appealing to the Indians. So when she says about multiculturalism has failed, I think it's just the othering.
Yeah.
Or either that, or I just think on the flip side, she's diluting this racial message. Because, like you said, how can your traditional racist, if that's even a term, how can they continue their message when you've got someone brown saying that to them?
And actually, in many ways, that highlights what you're articulating about your personal journey as well. In that it's very hard for many people to understand how somebody who would be attacked by precisely the kind of characters that she's seeking to appeal to can end up doing what they're doing. But it speaks to intergenerational trauma and all sorts of other emotional and intellectual contradictions. It's a fascinating area of study and one into which I've barely dipped my toe. But thank you for the guidance, actually, Rakesh. 10:30 is the time. Lottie Morley is here now with your headlines. 10:34 is the time. Nikki is in Kent and she writes, I think you might have forgotten what show you're writing into here, Nikki, because you begin by saying, sorry, I have to bring Brexit into this discussion. Nobody has to apologise for bringing Brexit into any discussion on this show. It will be the defining political issue of at least 2 or 3 generations in this country. But it is as if, writes Nikki, the Conservative politicians have to keep the hate up towards expats or immigrants in order to keep their Brexit lies alive, the lies about the foreigners in their midst and people that voted leave and think it's the permission to applaud this rancid racist language. Well, but I still want to understand what it means. When she says multiculturalism has failed, despite being, by most measures, an exemplar of how it hasn't failed at all. It's 10:35. Kevin is in Islington. What is she talking about, Kevin?
I do not know what to say, James. She's an immigrant that I am, and she is now do not like other immigrants.
Her parents came here. She was Suicidal Braverman herself was born here.
Oh, absolutely not. But she's the daughter of an immigrant,
Yes.
and there's a mathematical rule that A is equal to B and B is equal to C, and therefore A is equal to C. So let me just prove it to you in that way.
Okay, carry on.
She is actually an immigrant. I'll tell you this, James. I actually came 19 years ago to this country.
Yes.
And I'm not a doctor. I actually work with NHS.
Okay.
I'm a consultant. I work somewhere in sort of southwest London, but I live in Islington. And I contributed this country completely. And just to let you know, I have one radiologist and one gynecologist. They came to this country by boat. And, you know, one went to Oxford, the other went to LSE, where you actually went as well, quite frankly. And they are actually contributing this country one way or the other. When I listened to this woman last night, I was always under the impression that, you know, she was basically the Attorney General of England and Wales.
Yeah.
And she's a clever woman, and, you know, she would be far better than Priti Patel and whatnot as well. She's well educated. But when I was actually listening to her last night, I actually laughed for at least 30 minutes. That how can that be possible that one immigrant who made it here, you know, she's the daughter of an immigrant, she's completely immigrant, like Rishi Sunak. And then they say, well, actually, close the door and no other immigrants. If I wouldn't have to come to this country, James, I would have never ended up in Imperial College. I would have never become a doctor as well.
What?
This country gave me those opportunities.
And you know, and that is, it puts people who are critics of Suella Braverman in the bizarre position of defending her right to be her, really, which she seems to believe she or at least her 21st century equivalent shouldn't have the rights that she and her parents enjoyed. So when she says multiculturalism has failed, what does she really mean?
Well, she is actually the product of multiculturalism.
Well, that's what I would say, but that can't be. So what does she? Yes, but what does she mean? Because she
didn't mean anything.
Right.
She's a busy fool because she's basically fooling her own self. When you're the production of multiculturalism, now you are basically complaining of that multiculturalism. You are anti-immigrant. Well, if the immigration rules were that tight as the way it is now, your parents would have never come to this country. You would have never been into university and become sort of the Attorney General of this country, and then now a Home Secretary of this country.
She also studied in Paris. She also studied in Paris, so you know there's a proper sort of cosmopolitanism in her background that she seems to find repellent when other people.
It doesn't make any sense.
It must make sense. I'm going to stop you there. It must make some sense because she knows what she's doing, I think, and other people. We might use the phrase dog whistle, although I don't think this is a dog whistle. I think this is a perfectly audible whistle. So she is appealing to a section of the society, a section that is disproportionately represented in the Conservative Party membership, as we know, and yet somehow trying to inflame these ideas and these prejudices while simultaneously excusing herself from the hatred that she fosters. It's bizarre. That's the bit I don't get. She says multiculturalism has failed. Does she mean there are too many women in headscarves walking around, for example?
That is the thing, James. And you know, if you want to stop the immigration and you want to reduce the immigration to this country, the way I see it, that I think we need to stop wars outside of the United Kingdom and sending forces to other places as well. It will stop automatically. I mean, I lived here for the last 19 years, and I've never ever seen any Syrian in this country until the war started, and who basically supported all of it. I mean, I'm from the part of the world where people love you, basically, and I do not want to say it, and there would be lots of controversy around you as well. But just to let you know, there's a guy called Imran Khan. He actually loves you, and you know he even talked about you a few days ago before he went into jail. The Prime Minister of Pakistan, who married to Imran Khan and whatnot, is Jemima Khan and whatnot as well. You are very famous there, though, by the way, and I think they want you to go there and just join the PTV there, the Pakistan Television Network. You will be doing extremely well, James. You are, just to let you know this. So what basically?
Well, this took an unexpected turn, didn't it? Enough about me.
You're the hero. You're the hero in that country, and you're also the hero in India as well. By the way, just to let you know.
Yes, we shall see.
Just to let you know this, James.
But that is what she's talking about. She's talking about there are two. I mean, you know, you can insert whichever bit of society, whichever bit of the diaspora, whichever beneficiaries of immigration you personally don't like, she is telling you that you're right not to like them and there's too many of them here. But she obviously doesn't account for the people who would include her in that category.
That's correct. If the NHS doesn't work, we will have to stop, obviously, complaining and blaming immigration that it's because of the immigration. If let's say the TfL doesn't work, we will actually, blaming someone else. It's so easy to blame someone else.
It is, and Nigel Farage genuinely did. I stumbled across it while researching my new book. I genuinely did blame traffic jams on immigration, and it didn't exactly curtail his rise through the ranks of British media and politics. Kevin, thank you. I crikey, covered a heck of a lot of ground, but from the perspective as well as someone who is proof that multiculturalism works. Without multiculturalism, what sort of state would the NHS be in? Unless when someone like Suella Braverman uses the word multiculturalism, she means something different from what Kevin and I hear or what you hear. She means something different, and I suspect that the idea that there are too many people here, too many women walking around in headscarves, not including nuns and the late Queen, but too many Muslim women walking around in headscarves is what Suella Braverman is talking about, despite those numbers being completely negligible as well. And speaking of negligible numbers, I think the figure is 451 in 2022, which are the last available figures. Net migration now running at about 600,000. I don't know how many asylum applications were processed in 2022, but I can tell you that 451 people cited their sexuality as a source of potential persecution back in a home country. So that's 451 people in a country with a population of nearly 70 million, or 451 people against a backdrop of net immigration the following year in excess of 600,000. And for reasons that only Suella Braverman can know for sure, she felt that yesterday was a good day to talk about not letting sexuality be a grounds for seeking asylum. And the Daily Mail have dug out a lawyer today to write about it, and the article oddly makes no mention of numbers. It's weird, that, isn't it? How big a problem is this idea of... So let us accept that some asylum seekers may lie about their sexuality as a reason for being granted asylum. So they would be persecuted in their home country for being gay, but they're going to pretend to be gay because they want to move here for different reasons. So let's imagine that some people do that. So out of 451 people who were examined, if you like, whose cases were examined and processed, how many did the authorities fail to spot were lying, and how many were telling the truth? So even among those 451, you're looking at a small minority of the 451, and yet that apparently is a big enough problem for the Home Secretary to speak about. It's really ugly, right? Joe's in Camden. Joe, what would you like to say?
Hi there, how you doing? I think maybe over-intellectualising it a bit too much. I think it's just pure racism, and she's been up to the right of her party because I think she's going for the leadership role. I think that there's an I'm mixed race, just to say I'm mixed race. And what I believe is that what you find is and I surround myself with black and Asian and white people all my life. I grew up in a predominantly white area. But what you tend to find as an adult is once someone gets elevated to a certain position, they always associate greatness or whiteness with success. And what they want to do is distance themselves from their origins, where they came from. And what I find, because I look Asian, but I'm mixed race, I tend to get treated slightly differently when an Asian person speaks to me than rather a white person speaks to me. Okay. And I probably was called a coconut growing up, which I wasn't actually. I just adapted to the society. Yes. But I find that a good way of thinking about this is, goodness gracious me, I don't know if you remember that clip of the two couples not wanting to be Pakistani, but associating themselves with the golf club. I remember that clip. And it seems to be that once you elevate to a certain point, I think we want to distance ourselves from things that allow us to accept where we come from. I think that tends to happen. And I find that in the Asian communities, and I have these conversations all the time, and there is I'm okay to be Asian when I go to a wedding or go to the mosque or the Hindu temple, but when I'm successful, I predominantly want to be white. If you're a middle class, a certain point of success. So I believe she's out and out racism, and I think it's her leadership ambitions.
And that, that's a calculation.
And I think we're intellectualising it.
Well, I don't
much.
know that we are. I balk at that accusation, but I balk at most accusations. So it doesn't mean it's not valid. But it doesn't answer the question of what does she mean. And your answer could be quite simple to this question. But when she says multiculturalism has failed, what does she really mean?
Simple answer. Women in burqas, people on boats. She's appealing to a certain extreme right of the party, and she's doing that for political
very
reasons.
deliberately and very
When she talks
transparently, and off the back of 13 years of power. So it's an attack upon the record of the government in which she holds one of the highest offices.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Agreed.
How bizarre. Thank you, Joe. Taking us right up to 10:45. But before we go to the junction, I have some grim news to share with you. Officers have made an arrest after a teenage girl was stabbed and sadly died in Croydon this morning. Chief Superintendent Andy Britton, who's in charge of local policing, said our immediate thoughts are with this young girl's family, who are facing the most tragic of news. Our officers are with the girl's family to support them. Acting on information provided to them, officers also worked closely with colleagues from across the Met and the British Transport Police to track a teenager in connection with the stabbing. I can confirm, said Chief Superintendent Andy Britton, that an arrest was made at about 9:45 this morning in the Croydon area. At this early stage, we believe that he may have known her. So that's very, very sad news from Croydon in the last hour. The time now is 10:46. It is 10:49 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I see Sangeeta has put together a collection of senior conservatives as evidence of how absurd it is to suggest that multiculturalism has failed, starting, of course, with the Prime Minister, but also at the current or recent cabinets. You've got Kemi Badenoch, Sajid Javid, you've got Suella Braverman herself, Kwasi Kwarteng, Priti Patel, Nadeem Zahawi. I guess there is a case for arguing that this doesn't prove that multiculturalism has succeeded, because if you are a conservative politician arguing that there is too much immigration, then you're not arguing from the point of view of multiculturalism, are you? You're sort of arguing for monoculturalism, but with the hope/belief that you are exempt from any unpleasantnesses that may be unleashed. I don't know. It's a weird one. I find it emotionally and intellectually confusing sometimes, but I don't believe that skin colour, and all of those politicians, of course, are members of ethnic minorities. I kind of don't believe that just because you've got brown skin or black skin, you're not allowed to be a racist. I think that that's a bit white saviour. I've fallen into this trap a couple of times myself in the past, and it's quite. Mehdi Hassan's tweeted something overnight that speaks to that possibility, and of course I'm not sure I would or could do that as a white man, and that is as it should be, because I don't have the history of trauma, I don't have the shared experience of racism in the way that a person of colour would. But you don't. It's lazy, I think, and patronising to think that anybody who's not got white skin must be either compelled or expected to subscribe to the same values. It's as daft as thinking everybody who has got white skin must therefore subscribe to the same values. So it's tricky. The word assimilation is not the same as the word integration, for example, and neither mean the same as multiculturalism. But we're still not 100% clear on what Suella Braverman means to imply when she says that multiculturalism has failed. 10:52 is the time. Paul is in Southampton. Paul, what would you like to say?
Thank you for having me on your show.
You're very welcome.
I'm just really disappointed. I mean, I've been involved in politics for over 40 years, and at local government, and I was the mayor of Boston when we went through Brexit.
Oh, crikey.
And so I can tell you how bad it was there.
Yes.
And I'm now in Southampton because I wanted to live in a multicultural town near the grandchildren.
Yes.
All I'd just say is interesting. You've got to look at why she's doing this. And I also remember, being a Brummie, I was around when the Rivers of Blood speech.
Yeah.
You know, and I have to say, what she's saying is very similar. If you read that speech and read what she's doing now, she's really challenging what kind of people we want into this country. And I think the point that you raised about whether she's from, brown skin or whatever, yes, I don't think that's irrelevant. I think you're right. I think it's a mindset. And, you've got to look over the last 12 years, since David Cameron and what he did, and with Theresa May when she sent the vans around London, and then since then with all the women who are in the Home Office there. Yes. And there's a mindset in there. When they fail on immigration, and they are failing with it, because they don't know how to deal with it, the best thing to do is just attack it. And they actually think, and I actually believe, that she's challenging for the leadership of the Conservative Party. And also, you've got to also think this week, I think she's trying to take a bit of steam off the Prime Minister anyway with the train issue. And, she's
I don't know about the second bit, but I think the first bit definitely holds true. Because Liz Truss did this as well, but using nonsense about trade deals that were rubbish and pretending they were brilliant. So you've got, in this case, possibly 1.5 eyes on the Conservative Party membership, and you can rely because of your status. So the Home Secretary gives a speech that we would probably rather ignore, but we can't because she's the Home Secretary. So it's national news. But you've touched on the politics of it, Paul, which is actually bonkers because it's an attack upon the party that's been in charge for the last 13 years.
Let's be clear. Normally, when you're involved in politics, you are community leaders. Community leaders lead communities.
Yes.
The way that what she's doing is not leading a community. She's actually trying to fragment a community.
Well, that's a very good point.
How can she make a job to be, the Home Secretary and potentially, the Prime Minister of this country if she can't lead our country?
So it's divide and rule. It's divide and rule in the simplest sense then. And the other thing it does, which I hadn't thought of until you put it like that, is, and we may talk about this later in the week, is that it sends a really unpleasant message to people living here that the Home Secretary thinks that had a hierarchy of humanity been in place last year or 10 years ago or 20 years ago, you wouldn't be here. You are not the sort of person that we want here. And that's where the emotional and intellectual confusion kicks in, because under that reading, she wouldn't be here either.
No, and sadly to say, the people, what kind of makes me ashamed is people in her own party.
Yes.
Allow her to make these statements, and they don't condemn it. And
some did actually. I think some have, but of course it's not going to be reported in the Mail, is it, or in much of the Murdoch media.
All I can say is the only thing that's got to happen, James, is that we need a general election, and hopefully the British public see through this nonsense and these bad vibes that you do. The other thing that...
but they don't see through it if you throw up enough of this. This is where the Trump parallels kick in, isn't it? Because the intoxicating nature of race hate is so complete that you'll forgive absolutely anything. Indeed, that's what he meant when he said you can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue.
And also, James, the figures nationally on hate crime are going up anyway.
Well, it's hardly surprising, is it? With her doing this, it'll be lawyers next that come under attack.
It will. Unfortunately, we live in a very sad society where the people who want to lead us want to create division in our society. It's not the kind of country that I think we want.
I think you're right. And it would be quite nice to see the opposition or an opposition party making these points in rather stronger terms instead of tiptoeing around the issues as Keir Starmer does. And there it is. Thank you, Paul, because it is very deliberate and it is very divisive. And in fact, Suella Braverman is the one that is driving division through our society by saying you're allowed to look at that person over there and think that they have less right to an education or a hospital bed, or they've got less right to it than you have. That is what she is telling people. And yet, again, we struggle with the notion that the people who want to believe that message would include her in the critique. Paul, lovely stuff. Thank you. I'd love to talk to you again about your experiences as mayor of Boston during Brexit. That must have been a bit of a ride, as they say. 10:57 is the time. Bridget is in Camden. Bridget, what would you like to say?
Yes. Good morning, James. Hello. I come at this from a sort of psychological perspective.
Yes.
Because there's a kind of illness that was defined by, I won't get too detailed, but it was discovered by Melanie Klein, who's well-known historically.
Okay.
And it's called projective identification.
Right.
Or projection.
Yes.
And I'm touching a bit on Jo, a previous speaker.
Yeah.
Because she's doing something very strange. And so is Richie Sunak, because both their families came over to England in the 60s.
Yes.
She was from, I think she was from...
one parent from Mauritius, another from Kenya.
That's right. And it's a very strange thing. They've kind of externalized their discomfort, I think, about their own heritage and projected it onto what they call the small boats.
Yes.
And it's actually a very intractable problem to treat, which is why I think, I won't go into Rishi's position, he's a kind of enabler, I think.
Right.
But it would be very difficult to help her. It would take years and years of therapy to kind of unravel this.
What it is that is going on inside
That's
her,
right.
really.
And I do agree with this, other people's sort of idea that it's political, but it's not. I find it when I watch her, I find it that coming from quite a profound place.
That's a great word. So what you're telling, it goes deeper than ambition.
Yes.
This is not opportunism. So. This is psychological.
And I don't think she can help it.
No, I don't think she can either.
I think it's out of control.
Well, you see it, it bubbles over sometimes when she dreams of Daily Telegraph front pages, deporting but bona fide asylum seekers, actual, because the applications aren't processed until you get to Rwanda, and then they pass, and they stay in Rwanda. She dreams about that. That's sick.
It's very sinister, that.
It is, isn't it?
Very. She worries me. I mean, I'm from Canada. I don't know if you picked up my accent, but England welcomed me, and I was entitled to come here. I had no problems here. But England is a very welcoming country.
Well, I'd like to think so, certainly compared to other European countries as well. We're a paragon of multiculturalism, and yet we have beneficiaries of it insisting that it's failed. And I think, actually, when I put it like that, beneficiaries of it insisting that it's failed, then you're talk of psychology and profundity, a sort of profound basis for this dissonance, actually becomes irresistible. Because my language is simple and your language is more academic, but you're absolutely right. It is profound, and it is deeply, deeply strange. And the curse of the liberal once again. And I don't say this glibly. I mean, it is the idea that people are fundamentally good. And when people end up doing terrible things, it's often because of something that has happened to them. And that makes me feel sorry for Suella Braverman, which is, I mean, not a particularly helpful or interesting perspective, but I would argue that it's close to inevitable the more work you do on understanding how she could end up in the place where she's ended up. Bridget, thank you. The time is 1 minute after 11. It is 4 minutes after 11, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm going to go in a slightly unexpected direction next, because it's a topic that is actually really important, but which, and indeed is newsworthy, but it is I'm not as immediately provocative or inflammatory as Suella Braverman's latest rantings. I'm talking about two issues, really. One is the what of it, and the other is the why of it. Children are missing school on an unprecedented scale, and the reasons for it are unlikely to be addressed by the policies in place to fix it. Mental health difficulties are on the rise on incredible levels. This generation of children that also endured distance learning, endured lockdowns and school closures, will have been impacted in ways that we are not going to fully understand for a while, if ever fully understand. We're coming to an understanding. Some research this week shows that middle-class children, wealthier children with parents more likely to still be together, suffered the most from distance learning. And I think part of the reasoning behind that is that I guess the more you've got to lose. So the more used you are to functionality and comfort, security, and a rich, if you like, social life, a rich inner and outer life, then the more you will suffer when those things are taken away. I think that must be part of it. Otherwise, you tell me why you think that middle-class children suffered more from the privations of distance learning than children from less privileged backgrounds. Can we dig that out, actually? Because I forgot to talk to you about that at the time. But it speaks very much to today's subject, which is essentially about the rocketing numbers of people who are young people who are not going to school, particularly among older children. And one of the reasons given, and there will be several reasons, one of the reasons given is a a softening of resolve, if you like, as a consequence of lockdown. I get this, actually. I didn't really think about it until it happened, until I read this research, until I saw this story. But the softening of normality, is that the right word? A sort of renormalization. You no longer felt every morning, I've got to get the kids to school, right? This is among parents. I'm interested in the motivations of the children and indeed of the parents. So you've got what is described as persistent absence now has more than doubled since before the pandemic. That is roughly defined as a pupil missing 10% or more of sessions. So persistent absence has more than doubled since the pandemic. Now, some of this, I think, will be anxiety and fear. I don't think you can underestimate how terrifying change can be, particularly for young people who spent a significant part of their formative years in a state of isolation. But I think that the parent angle is fascinating to me as well. You're unlikely to ring me, aren't you, and say, yeah, I don't really care whether my kid goes to school or not, James. But I would like you to, if you do recognise elements of your own experience in what I'm saying now. But I think that actually makes sense. I think that the first thing you think of when you get up in the morning is getting the kids to school, right? Depending on their age, but at key points in their education, making sure they're on their way to school, or sometimes if that's the way the cookie crumbles in your house, you're taking them to school, making sure they're out of bed, making sure they're not going to be late for school. It was the other way around in my house when I was growing up. I was so flipping weird about being late for school. I think they were quite nasty punishments when I was a day boy. I was late for school. I'd be shouting up the stairs to my dad to tell him to get out of bed and come quickly because we're going to be late. But usually it's the other way round, I think, in families. It's the parent doing the hectoring and the harrying to get the children to school. And that becomes such a crucial part of... I don't know what you'd call it, the family furniture, the familial furniture, right? That you never ever question it. You never ever question it. And then the pandemic ends, or at least the distance learning ends, and the schools reopen. The children go back to school. But something inside you has stayed the same. Somewhere inside you, that sense of urgency about getting the children to school has been diluted. Has it? Or even destroyed. It is no longer, we're fine, if I say nobody died, I'm not making light of the pandemic. You know that. But in the context of your specific family, their kids didn't go to school for the best part of a year and nobody died. What's the panic? You don't want to go, I can't be bothered. Also, I had a producer, my first ever producer, was fascinated with this subject. And I didn't really understand why. If you go to boarding school, what we once called truant and what we now call persistent absence, or even school refusal. If you go to boarding school, it's not really a thing. I mean, we did try to skip lessons sometimes, and you might fake a sick note or you might tell a lie. But actual, not going to school when you live at school is almost impossible to achieve. There was one morning when I somehow managed to lie in a made bed so flat that the prefects thought I'd got up and gone to school. But, of course, when I didn't turn up for lessons, phone calls are made and explanations are demanded. So you can't really play truant at a boarding school. So when I first started working here, my producer at the time, who went to a comprehensive school in Hanwell in West London, the same one that Mo Farah went to, actually, for fans of trivia and possible future pub quizzes. He was absolutely... He used to get very animated about the idea of parents being responsible for getting their children to school. Because by the time you reach the sixth form, you're physically quite formidable, right? I mean, imagine, for example, and to use an extreme as an illustration, a single mother, a slightly built single mother, trying to get a 17-year-old prop forward out of bed and to school when he doesn't want to go. What chance has she got? I'm not going to school, Mum, and there's nothing you can do about it. What chance has she got? Seriously. She can't physically. I mean, even if she was built like Jeff Capes, she wouldn't really be physically able to. What are you going to do? If a teenager is lying in bed and refuses point blank to go to school, for whatever reason, what the hell can the mum do about it? What can the dad do about it? I would say not very much at all. So the second bit of this story is the absurdity of fining parents when children don't go to school. It's quite Victorian, isn't it? So you've got mental health difficulties, which mean your child can't go to school. I'd like you to talk to me about that. 0345 606 0973. I know, for example, that the likelihood of you getting help from CAMHS is pretty much zero. A slight trigger warning now for talk of suicide, but many CAMHS departments in many councils up and down the country will not activate until an attempt is made by a young person. Even ideation is not enough for a referral to CAMHS. So criminally and chronically understaffed and unfunded have they become since David Cameron introduced austerity in 2010, that the likelihood of getting there is minimal, frankly, except in the most hideous of circumstances, and even then still hard. So that's a massive part of this story, is how on earth can it be right to punish a parent whose child is too ill to go to school? You know, if the child had 2 broken legs and needed to spend time off school as a consequence, no one would complain about that. But if it's a mental health issue that's keeping a child off school, then parents can still be punished for it. It's a last resort. MPs on the Commons Education Committee calling now for these fines to be kept as a last resort. But even if it's not a mental health issue that is compelling a child to stay in bed or not to go to school, even if it is, and I can speak from the imagining of my own youth, even if it is because you're stubborn and lazy and you're refusing to get out of bed because you don't want to go to school, because school's really boring, frankly, and I want to play FIFA. Well, my mates aren't going, so why should I? What can that parent do? Seriously. And if you know what teenagers are like, and it doesn't stay like this forever, thankfully, but you say, look, if you don't go to school, I'm going to get fined. A teenager, the response of a teenager that involves a rolling of eyes and, I don't care, that is not rare. I don't know what happens during adolescence, but it's as if sometimes the spark doesn't cross from one plug to the other. Your beautiful little baby who was utterly lovely until their 13th birthday becomes for 3 or 4 years a sort of grunting monosyllabic sludge. I don't care. Hasn't happened to us, thankfully. Seems to be slightly more a male thing, but it happens to girls as well. So what are you going to do? I'm not going to school. Well, I'm going to get fined. I don't care. You can afford it. I can't actually afford it. Well, then they can't fine you then, can they? I haven't got the money to pay the fine. Well, then you can't pay the fine then, can you? Next question. I mean, there's a reason why the Kevin and Perry characters that Harry Enfield and Kathy Burke did are so brilliantly timeless, isn't there? Because everyone is familiar with that model of adolescence. But what can you do? What can you do? So those are your 2 main reasons for persistent absence. Mental health issues, where you're almost certainly not getting the help, or just sort of dysfunctional relationship, a breakdown in parent-child relations, which means the child is just refusing to go to school. How is fining the parent ever the right answer? Never mind simply as the last resort, which I suppose you've got to take as progress from the Commons Education Committee. But how is it ever the right response to say, I'm going to fine the parents because the child won't go to school? It's weird, isn't it? The more you think about it, the weirder it looks as a policy. And yet at first glance, certainly if you're dealing with knee-jerk tabloid sensibilities, it would be an attractive policy. Oh, yes, absolutely, punish the parents. And by the way, if you can't afford to have children, then don't have children or something. But the more you think about it, in fact, don't we find this with almost every example of really lazy, bloated right-wing rhetoric? This actually just giving it 5 minutes of critical thinking and it falls apart like a cheap suit. How can punishing parents when children aren't going to school solve anything? Except for that small number of persistently absent children who are perfectly capable of going to school and will do so if they are fearful of their parents getting fined or of punishments being inflicted on them. I'm taking away your PlayStation if you don't go to school. It's a funny one, isn't it? So talk to me about it. Why? Our post-pandemic, I'm particularly interested in post-pandemic, why would the number of persistent absence have doubled? And ideally, we'll come at it from both angles, the perspective of the parent and the perspective of the child. And possibly the perspective of teachers as well. So what is it about the post-pandemic period in particular? Almost sounds like a tongue twister, that, doesn't it? The post-pandemic period in particular. She sells seashells on the seashore. What is it about the post-pandemic period in particular that propels persistent absence to previously unscaled heights? 0345 6060 973. It is 20 minutes after 11. Matt says middle-class parents were more likely to have jobs they could do from home, meaning the children weren't made to go into school, as poorer families would likely have jobs that they had to go into work for during the lockdown. It's a good point, Matt, but the comparison is made between children who were distance learning. So the children from affluent backgrounds who were distance learning received or suffered the steepest decline in mental health during the pandemic, a more steep decline than children who were also distance learning but were from less affluent backgrounds. But that would definitely be part of it. More likely to have parents working from home while trying to juggle childcare. But I don't know. The highly educated, here it is, those youngsters whose parents were employed, stayed together and were highly educated appear to have suffered sharper falls in mental health than those who were less well off. So, I think you've probably got part of the answer there, Matt, actually. The question of why the post-pandemic period has seen a huge spike in persistent absence is the one that we'll address a little more directly. 22 minutes after 11 is the time. Paula is in Stoke-on-Trent. Paula, what would you like to say?
Hi there, yeah.
Hello.
So I started a different job throughout lockdown, and that was moving from working in a school to working with an agency that tutors children who are either school refusers or they've been thrown out of school.
Okay.
So I work one-to-one with them, either in their home or in a public place like a library or museum or somewhere like that.
Yes.
So it's really opened my eyes, as to why some of these children are not in education. So I thought I'd just give you a call
Please.
there and just
Absolutely. Excellent.
Yeah, so,
you're right in the middle of it, really, aren't you?
I am, yeah, and it's heartbreaking. Some of it is heartbreaking. So majority of these children who I see who are not in education, it isn't the parents' fault. It really isn't.
No.
The parents are pulling their hair out and really worried for the future of their children. And for them, for their GCSEs, their exams, everything, the social skills, the parents are really, really worried. And when I start to work with them, majority of these cases, within the first or second session of working with them, I look at them and I'm working with them and go, this child's autistic. This child's got ADHD.
Right.
This child's dyslexic. And then you start to gain the trust of this child because they don't have any trust. They've lost trust. They've lost trust in the system.
Right.
And you start to work with them and you say to them, what was it like in school? Well, I read in your report, that you used to throw chairs and swear at the teacher and run out and hit people and stuff like this. Why were you doing that? And a lot of them is because they didn't understand the work. They didn't understand the work, and there's nobody there to help them. And then the next thing, they're moving on to the next part of the lesson, and they've not understood it. And so every time when they're going back to that classroom, it's like, well, I don't understand it anyway, so I may as well get kicked out. Then they'll put them into isolation, and they won't have to do any work there. They are given some work, but there's nobody really on their back to make them do the work. And and some of these kids, it's different situations. Every single child I work with, they're different. But a lot of them, I've found, is that they are so anxious in the classrooms, they can't conform. And when you're in school, you have to conform. And if you don't conform, they'll make you do something else to conform.
Yes.
So you'll get punished for something else. So, okay, so you're not conforming there, so we're going to make you do that, and you need to conform there. So you're not conforming there, so we'll punish you again. And you need to conform there. And these kids, their anxiety,
goes through the roof. And then during distance learning, presumably they calmed down a lot.
They did. So a lot of these children, I've noticed that when you speak to them, well, how was school before lockdown?
Yeah.
And we notice in a lot of these kids that I'm working with, lockdown happened as they moved from primary school to secondary school.
Yeah.
And that's a huge jump.
Yeah.
That's a huge jump to go from primary to secondary. And they got to secondary and it's a whole new ball game. You know, you're not mothered as much as what you are in primary school. You know, you're spoken to differently.
Yes, of course.
There's hundreds of people in your year, you know, and everything, and the anxiety levels. And then lockdown happened. So they went home. They're learning from home. And they're thinking, well, I enjoy this. I'm comfortable. I'm happy. I feel better. And then when they had to go back to school, the anxiety levels rise again. And now they've got to a teenage years where they know, I'm not going. I'm refusing. I am not doing this anymore. They kick off. They get thrown out. They get sent home for 3 days a week. They get put on reduced schedules.
You're describing it quite brilliantly, but it's bleak, isn't it? Because under your analysis, it all makes perfect sense. Of course things have got worse. Of course things are bad, and of course they've got worse. The system's entirely unfit for purpose. And I presume, Paula, and I hope you'll allow me to say, I have a feeling that you're brilliant at your new job.
Oh, thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. But I presume there are not nearly enough Paulas in the system to make as much change as we would, to make as much progress as we would like to see. They're
not. My day goes from driving from one home to the other, to the other, to the other. Sometimes I can be doing 70 miles just in one day, just going between different pupils. But I absolutely love this job. And as soon as these children start to trust me and see that I'm there for you, I've got your back, and I will teach you at whatever level you're at, I will meet it.
Yeah.
And as soon as they start to progress, the confidence. I've had parents crying to me because they're so happy.
I bet you have. And parents in those situations would take any baby step as a huge improvement, because it is a huge improvement. Do we need to change our mindset as a country then? And so the children that you work with, we don't see your job as being to get them back into school.
No.
We need to educate them. We need to educate them somewhere else.
Yeah, they're not going back, some of these kids. They need different provisions. The job that I do is a one-to-one. There's not many of them.
No,
and the agency is saying, have you got any more hours? Can you fit any more kids in?
Yeah.
Because Stoke-on-Trent at the moment has got loads of kids out of education.
Everywhere has.
And there's still loads. And sometimes you'll turn up to see a parent and they'll say, my child hasn't been in school for over 2 years.
Do you find the work more satisfying and rewarding than your last job?
Oh, without a doubt.
I thought you might.
It is brilliant. There's nobody to back. I do have paperwork,
yes, of
but
course.
I go at the child's pace. And for me, it's like, look, if the child isn't going to get his GCSEs, it doesn't matter. It's okay. But in the meantime, this child's gained confidence in somebody from education, and they've gained confidence in themselves. They've started to progress. They've started to learn.
Must be amazing.
And there's functional skills qualifications that they can do.
Rather than trying to hammer square pegs into round holes, it's just a waste of everybody's time.
Options.
Of course.
There's options.
Wow. I mean, occasionally I take a call. I think, and you were first, weren't you, on this topic? And I think, well, we've done it now. We don't need to talk to anyone else. That's it. So it's only 11:30. I've got, I'm here till 1. But and obviously I'm joking. There'll be lots of other wonderful contributions and different perspectives and different experiences. But that combination there of undiagnosed conditions rendering children in school unschoolable. And then the lessons of pandemic. So how big a role would masking have played? So prior to the pandemic, these children, they would have tried, even though they didn't understand. Got it. And then pandemic kind of took the distance learning kind of took the lid off masking, really, and people became their true selves.
It's this age group that we're all looking at, isn't it? If you look back, it's this age group right now who are due to do GCSEs last year, this year, the next year. Yeah. It's that age group that we're having problems with right now. You've got to look at that bridge. When they went from primary school to secondary school, they were just thrown into it.
Yeah.
There was no baby steps for them, and then that's when a lot of these kids with anxieties, it started to come out, and it's just heartbreaking. It really is. I'm sure you'll have some parents phoning, and I've got their back.
No, and they will be very well. It's bittersweet that they'll be very encouraged to hear you, but they'll be wishing to Billio that they had someone like you in their corner more directly, if you see what I mean, more immediately.
I wish there was more.
Yes, and someone's just pointed out in a text that I've lost that for women, or for girls rather, at that age, they might have gone into pre-puberty, gone into lockdown pre-puberty, and they're going back to school with entirely new identities, almost new bodies post-puberty. So you're adding all sorts of things to this mix, and that crossover year, that year 11 to that first year of secondary school from primary school, that's where God blimey. Thank you, Paula. That's like a master's guide to what is going on in some elements of this statistic, and therefore it becomes supremely unsurprising, perhaps, that persistent absence has rocketed post-pandemic. It's 11:31, and Lottie Morley is here with your headlines. 26 minutes to 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean, it's not really a mystery anymore, but there'll be lots of different answers to the same question as to why the number of children persistently absent from school, which again is an unhelpful phrase. It's not as bad as truant, is it? But the persistent absence sounds like an act of deliberate refusal rather than incapability, perhaps. But why would the pandemic have exacerbated the problem so completely? Sophie's in Guildford. Sophie, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
So I've got two daughters. One of them, 100% attendance, goes to school every day.
Yep.
The other one, she's very bright, she's very academic, she works very hard. She's also autistic, and she would fall into this category that you've been talking about.
Right.
And I think on the days when she's struggling, nothing, you could fine her, you could threaten her with whatever you wanted, you could threaten me with whatever you wanted. But when she can't go into school, she can't go into school. And I think the lady before hit it right on the head. My daughter, she could have been describing my daughter. She changed schools. She moved secondary school in 2020. All the things she talked about, I was like, yes.
That is, I feel seen. But unfortunately, Paula's in Stoke-on-Trent and you're in Guildford.
I know. She could move. That would be nice.
That's true. That's true.
But yeah, and I think I'm glad to hear you saying that not to blame the parents and not to blame the children, because it's not that they can't, it's not that they won't go to school, it's that they can't go to school. And we wouldn't blame somebody who couldn't walk on a broken leg
I know,
for not being able to walk.
I just find that it's almost becoming a cliche, that observation, but it's so powerful, and things were getting a lot better. Things have been better than they were in the 70s by a country mile, but I fear they might have gone backwards, particularly in terms of funding and support since 2010, because when schools have to make cuts to budgets and staffing levels, it's going to be the staff who look after a small number of pupils who are at the front of the queue. And then post-pandemic, things get worse again.
I agree. I think I was saying to your producer exactly that. I think possibly there's pandemic links, but I think also there's a lot to do with funding.
Yeah.
And the fact that before the pandemic, there was lots of teaching assistants in schools and lots of support, and a lot of that. So the children that were just about getting along with that support in place, the support's been ripped away. They haven't got that backup anymore, and it's led to this. And it really, the teachers do their best, the schools do their best, but they're so limited that kindness goes a long way, but it can only go so far. And if they haven't got the resources, there's only so much they can do.
And there it is. So what do you do on a bad day? Just sit with it?
Well, yeah. So luckily, my daughter's school are really flexible.
You are very lucky, because there are a lot of schools that would not be. I think they're all in need of improvement, but you're lucky there. I've just got back from taking her now, so she goes in when she's ready, and there's no pressure from the school to rush her in or to get her in, and I don't mean they don't care, because they do care, but they don't mind what time that is. Yes, of course.
And they work with us, and they're wonderful. And I feel anyone who's not in that position with their school or with their employer must have things a lot harder, because without that support from school, I honestly don't think she would be in school now. I think she would be out of school altogether.
Yeah, and the school, and they understand that. The school understand that to have her 90% of the time is better than having her no % of the time. To have her 50% of the time is better than having her no % of the time. But again, the sort of prescriptive nature of education, league tables would, of course, lend themselves to a school regime, to a head teacher being less sympathetic. But you can't. Education is about so much more than numbers and letters on a piece of paper at the end of the exam season. Thank you, Sophie. And it's weird to talk about being lucky in the context of also being unlucky, but of course you are. If something suboptimal is happening in your life and you're getting help, you are luckier than someone who is enduring the same problem who isn't getting help. Emma is in Southport. Emma, what would you like to say?
Hi, I can sort of mirror the story of the first two.
Yeah.
My son's 14. He's having a really, really difficult time. He is on the pathway for ASD.
Right.
And when things have got really bad last year, I asked for a reduced timetable.
Yes.
My reduced timetable, because his anxieties are so high, and I think only for the love he's got for me and his dad, is the only reason, like, he gets up every day, and he can never just get up and get dressed like my
he wakes up.
children.
He wakes up with rocks on his shoulders, with a black dog on his shoulders.
Yeah, but I can get him through the door most days. But it got to a point where he was feeling suicidal. Nothing felt like living. His anxiety became crippling. Even when he was lying in bed of a night time and he'd had a few of his mates staying over, he said, "Mum, this feeling just doesn't go away any time." So I went back to school and said, right, I need to reduce his anxieties. So they said, okay, well, what about a reduced timetable? So I said, great, I'll bring him in 3 days a week. And they said, no, our reduced timetable is you bring him in at 10 and he goes at 2.
Right.
And I said, well, where's the reduction in his anxieties?
It doesn't work like that, does it?
It doesn't matter to him whether he's going to school at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. He's still going to school, which is predominantly the centre of what causes him the most distress. And then because he sort of comes home from school and he replays his day, it takes him ages to calm down. Now, I've got foster children, and they've been removed from their parents and placed with me because of the sort of experiences they've had.
Yes.
And I think to myself, I feel like I'm doing my son more emotional harm than what the children I'm looking after have been removed from their parents for. So I'm thinking, who am I?
You mean by prioritising, by kind of, for want of a better word, you mean by forcing him to go to school? Yeah.
Forcing him to go to school.
Well, you're not forcing him to go to school. You're trying to accommodate.
No, I'm just the system.
Oh, mate. I mean, crikey. And are the school coming at it as a box-ticking exercise then? Because, I mean, you say that you were going to echo. Like right, because you've had a very different experience from the previous caller, whose child's school is recognising what needs to be done, as opposed... Because you say, I can't go to school some days. Right, well, in that case, you can come in at 10. I mean, it's just witless, isn't it? It's stupid.
It's my number. So they did agree with it for 6 weeks and then said that they would review it after that because that's not in their policy and that's not what they do. I'm waiting for them to start pulling me up now because I have said to him, listen, this is year 10, year 11. He is now on some medication for it. And I've said, right, okay. He's off today, but on his days off, even when I said to him, right, he'll be going to work with my brother.
Yeah.
He'll be doing some building work. You can't be doing that. How can he be off school and being all anxious and depressed, but yet you're sending him off to work? And I'm like, well...
It's about what he gets anxious about, you silly sausage, isn't it? I mean, goodness me, he doesn't get anxious in that context, and he does get anxious in that context. How hard can that be to understand? You might as well say if it's all that bad, how can he stay in bed all day? I mean, it's just a stupid thing to say. It's. Oh, I'm sorry. I really am.
At least he's not doing nothing. And
yes, exactly.
I'm quite proactive. I've explored every possible avenue, the 14 to 16 year provisions. Yeah. One time I made a phone call that said, right, follow this number. So I followed the numbers across through the government website. Phone this number, and at the end of the phone I was like, I'm inquiring about your 14 to 16 provision. And they said, I don't know what you're on about. And I said, well, I followed the government website to come, and this would be a perfect for my son. This is exactly what he needs, half educational, half work experience. That's ideal. It's a different setting. No, we haven't got anything like that. And I'm like, well, I followed it off the government. No, we haven't got anything.
Well, it's just
and
not
then
there.
Other courses, they've said, the funding's been cut. We haven't got enough bodies. We haven't got enough bums on seats. There's just nothing. There's no other alternative. And he would thrive in a work environment.
Yeah, I get it. And so that's the 2010 catching. And then finally, with the pandemic, has that made a difference, do you think, or not? The lockdown, the distance learning?
I do. He would just absolutely benefit from that, to go back to that sort of environment. Yes, social, but he's quite social anyway, really. He does get himself out and about, but generally that's because he's had, it's as if like because he's wasted his day in school, he's got to turn that day into something a bit more positive, so he'll go out and meet his friends and things. So I'm quite fortunate there.
Well, there you go. Both mums saying, recognising that they're luckier than others, but of course unluckier than many as well. I just actually, before you go, Emma, I don't do that thing. Then when you thought that you were doing harm to your boy, you're not. You're doing your absolute best, and it's very lucky to have you.
Oh, but you pull yourself apart.
I know, like, you do.
Because
I know,
when you know that he is so distressed, and you're saying to him, I know this is bad, but you've got to.
Yes.
Because I'm a foster carer, I'm classed as a professional person. I'm actually doing mental health nursing and social work.
Gosh.
So it's like I feel like I'm stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea. What do I do for the best? And believe me, I've explored every avenue, and I think
exactly.
The poor parents who are out there who have got possible issues themselves or haven't got the support and think, right, that's not worked. Yeah. Let's try this instead. And believe me, I've explored every avenue and struggle.
I know, but I know that you know that you shouldn't be hard on yourself, even when it is irresistible. Yeah. But you really shouldn't, because it's
know, as parents, that's what we do. We pull ourselves apart.
Well, and that you can only ever be as happy as your unhappiest child, which is a bit of a glib saying, but it contains a kernel of truth, doesn't it? But be kind to yourself, Emma, please.
Yes.
All right.
All right, thank you. Thanks for your time.
Well, there you go. Stay safe. It's 11:45. It is 11:49, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the crisis is immense, isn't it, Paula? And in fact, all the callers really touching. A lot of heart and a lot of nerves, in fact, this morning. And the education system is not fit for purpose in this sense. And that, it's not the fault of teachers. Teachers are striking to try to make things better for children and themselves. But of course, some people would probably turn that around and claim that they're adding to the problems, in the same way that Rishi Sunak tries to blame the state of the NHS on striking doctors rather than 13 years of real term cuts, and lies, of course, about everything from 40 new hospitals through to increases in investment. You kind of see why. Particularly, what year is it? What's the final year of primary school? Is that year 10? No. Well, no, of course it isn't. I get so confused on this. It's year 11, the final, year 6, and then the first year of secondary school is year 7. Yeah, so that is the cohort I worry most about. The ones that, and one of mine was in that cohort, actually, going from year 6 to year 7, and then year 7 being obliterated by distance learning, because that entry into secondary school is traumatic enough already, and you didn't have it. You didn't have your handheld during that period. The reason why I get confused on years, despite having 2 children in the system, is because my school had, you know what my school called these things? They were called things like the remove and the upper fifth. Perkins Minor in the upper fifth is moving into the remove. I had a scholarship class as well that I was in. So when I was 13, I was in like a scholarship class. I think we called it the 6th form, but I was 13. And then I get to my next school and I'm in the 4th form. So I went from the 6th form to the 4th. That's why I get confused. That's. It's not because I'm ignorant or stupid. Well, I might be ignorant and stupid, but on this issue, that's where my confusion comes from. As I think, what was I when I was 11? What was I? I was in 5A, which came after 5B. So it went 5C, 5B, 5A, 6th form, 4th form, 5th form, remove, lower 6th, upper 6th. It's just insane, isn't it? And we did private education yesterday. Helen's in Cambridge. Helen, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
First of all, I'd just like to say that I found you just after the pandemic, and you've been the only person I can listen to and really feel like I've got an adult conversation every day, because what happened to me was everything was ticking along fine with 2 boys, one in year 3, one in year 1, and the pandemic hit, and I was working in a high school as a special needs support for children, and my children didn't take the pandemic situation well at all.
Right.
One in the year 1, he got very upset about eating around other people, knives and forks, cups.
Okay.
And the eldest was very upset about all the changes to the classroom, being in class from children from different age groups, different teachers that he didn't know. He is on the spectrum. We're a neurodiverse family, so that's absolutely fine. And then it just went completely wrong to the point where when they did go back, they were key worker children but found it very hard to go in.
Right.
But when they did go back, it's almost like every bit of strength in them, their resolve was gone.
Oh.
And it got to the point, I'll keep it succinct for you because it's a long story. It got to the point where my husband is doing a PhD and sort of quite high in medical world.
Right.
He couldn't cut his hours. And we said, so I've got 2 children that aren't going into school, but I'm working in the school, helping new Year 7s cope with school.
Yeah.
And we just had to make the decision that I would have to give up work. And my life and my battle would be, because we chose attendance would be to get them into school and make that environment work for them through a journey of building a relationship with the schools.
Yeah, I've got it.
They had to move schools several times because primary schools aren't always receptive to building that relationship, especially when the parent is saying, well, this is what we need to do, can we do this? It's not always how they like it. No. But then I found the one that did, and they're wonderful. So what I've done with my boys, and it's every morning, I go into battle every morning, especially with the 11-year-old that's just started high school. Yeah. Won't get out of bed. We start at 6 a.m. We have processes we go through. Sometimes he just won't talk, so we use pictures to communicate. Right. We use lots of different tactics. I never ever physically, although I am trained to restrain and things because I work with high-level stuff, yes. I don't, because it's not going to help with, it just makes school look like a bad thing.
Of course.
So what we've got to the point where he is now, for example, yesterday, he was feeling sick. He gets anxiety, nosebleeds, the 11-year-old. He couldn't hold his bag. He just couldn't do anything. But we did go in. Right. We had a meeting that was an hour long. And I said to him, I'm not going to take you home. And he was devastated. He was grabbing my car keys. Yeah. Being 11 in high school, that's quite hard to watch. It's like watching him at 4.
Yes, of course.
And I said, I'm leaving you here. And the reason I'm leaving you here is because it's the right thing to do. And I've worked out with this school to how we can make you happy. Yeah. And they are. Everything's built around books. He's a library worm. He's a bookworm. Right. So everything's built around books for him. And for my other son, everything's built around reading for him because he's the same. Okay. But it takes me
it's a mountain. All morning. Of course it is. Every single day.
Every single day. And then I put you on, sometimes not live because I'm later with the progress. And I think that this is my adult world. And I don't have anyone to... So sometimes I think my perspective from this conversation is that's what lockdown did. It changed my life a lot as well as my children's. Yeah. But I gave up a lot.
You did.
And I think, because I chose attendance.
What choices did you have? What would the other options be?
I applied to lots of different charities, through all of the different processes, through early help with social services, family workers, and basically everyone said, if you can't make them go and you can't carry them to the car without shoes on, or you can't do it without getting... Sometimes I get bitten by my boys and sometimes I get hit and called names and things because they're so upset and stressed about going in and conforming and making it to the end of the day. My little one said, how do I make it to the end of the day, Mum?
Oh, bless him.
And I said, this is how you make it to the end of the day, love. And we've been working on that. It's time-consuming, it's stressful, and you lose yourself.
You do lose yourself. I get that completely. And also the concept of light at the end of the tunnel is not there either, is it? You know what it would look like and what it would involve, but you've got no idea of when or even whether it's ever going to be reached. It's a full-time job that you describe. And when they're at school, you're waiting for the phone to ring, I imagine, are you? Or...
Well, perfect timing. I got a phone call on Monday saying, can you come and get your son? Yeah. He's not well. So I knew instantly it was anxiety. He hadn't drunk much. I can tell you that because I know my son. Yeah. And he hadn't eaten because of the anxiety. So I went in, I said, I'm not going to take him home. And they were like, oh.
I'm going to feed him.
So I sat with 40 minutes with him through lunch. Yeah. He ate, we talked, we read. And then I said, I'm going to leave you here, lovey. And he said, okay. And I said, I'll see you at 3:30. And that's what I've done all along.
because his
because I
tummy's in
gave up
knots.
my job to do it.
His tummy's in knots, and that is, I mean, you're lucky again. It seems the wrong word to use to be in a position where you could do that. But
my husband's took on another day at work, so he does 6.5 days a week at work in a GP surgery. So he just keeps going and doing extra hours so that I can do that.
So it's all there. What are the good times? When do you have any moments of repose together?
This morning was great. They had a good morning.
Yeah.
They'd had a shower last night. They got dressed. This morning we did pancakes because they like baking, so I try and get round it. We start early, and I prepare. So I prepare, plan. Everything's on a list, and when days go well, they go well like that. When they don't go well, we go into school at 10 or whatever. But we go.
There are good days. And of course, anyone still labouring under the illusion that punishing you, if on the occasions where they don't get into school, would somehow be constructive or helpful, has hopefully had that. Joe's just texted me to say these mums are absolute legends, and you are, and although you probably don't feel like that.
No, I don't feel like it. And I miss my job. I miss the children that I worked with in the high school that needed me, and I had to choose between them and my own children, and that was the worst choice, because the year 7s that I left just cried their eyes out, because we'd built a relationship, you see, we'd built that trust within ourselves for them to come to school. When they were having COVID tests in the sports hall, and sometimes they'd be sick because it went so far down, the person that was doing it, we'd all, I'd clear it up for them, and then we'd go again, and we'd just built that relationship. And then you have to say, I've got to go because my kids need me, and it's heartbreaking. But
it's obviously the right thing to do. It really is. Interesting that. Is about 2 mums today. I don't know how much of the hour you heard, but another mum who does fostering as well. So that being
yes, I heard that lady, yeah.
So in a way, it's almost as if your record and your experiences, your professional experiences, equips you for this battle in a way that many mums won't have the tools.
What if I didn't? Yeah, what if I didn't? I mean,
that's what I'm thinking.
It would be horrific. I'd just be a mess on the floor. And every charity I went to said, there just isn't anyone. We don't have someone that comes out and helps. There's no one at school that can come out and help. And even that meeting I had in the high school yesterday, the person I was with said, I've got to go, we're busy. And I said, but these things can't be rushed. If you want to do this properly, you need to do this properly.
Otherwise we'll be back next week or next month. I'm sorry.
And I did say that. I said, look, these things have to be done properly. Once you get this right, he will come. And I am quite firm like that. He will come.
Yeah, and you're getting it right, but of course, some days it will feel like 1 step forward, 2 steps back. I don't know what to say. I'm just going to say good luck, Helen.
Thanks. Do you know what? If I could get to Southampton, I would, because I'd love to see you. But I don't think that every day. I think, if I could just get childcare.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But no, I know. It's fine. It's lovely to speak to you.
Well, obviously, if you can, then you're not paying for the tickets. I'd take care of that. But if you can get there, then I'd love to meet you too. But
the radio station is fantastic. I absolutely love it, and it just is so. It's the only station I have ever listened to that lets opinions happen.
Thank you.
And that's what I love. So I wanted to call in today because this mattered to me. So.
Well, it clearly does, and you can see why. And you've helped a lot of people come to a much better understanding of an issue that they wouldn't previously have known about, let alone understood. And that's why I also love it as well, actually. Thank you, Helen. It's 12:01. 5 minutes after 12 is the time. I just briefly, Helen has prompted I might get a bit emotional if this carries on, prompted an avalanche of lovely words about what we do here and what me. So thank you. I am reading them all, but even my ego won't extend to reading them all out loud. I can assure you that the feelings are entirely mutual, but thank you so much. 5 minutes after 12 is the time. It struck me, looking at this headline, that the conversation we're going to have will be a little bit similar to one that we had yesterday. Although at first glance, houses and schools don't have much in common, apart from bricks and mortar, I suppose. So I think you persuaded me yesterday that the notion of privilege is a little bit more selfish than I originally acknowledged. So I did genuinely wonder whether, just to round up or round down the numbers, if 10% of the nation's children go to a fee-paying school where they receive a measurably better education in both academic and social capital, It's not true across the board. There's some state schools are brilliant. There's, I think, one in East London that gets more kids into Oxford and Cambridge than anywhere else in the world. But as a general truth, the reason why some parents, myself included, pay school fees, my parents included, is because, A, you can. That's the most crucial point of it, regardless of how much we like to cast ourselves as hard-working. The point is you can pay it, you can afford it, and you do it because it is better than other available options. And the question yesterday was about whether reducing that figure from 10% to 5% is good or bad for the general population. So, because you're not eradicating it. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, that Labour's plans to put VAT on school fees is going to have a particular impact on the number of children in school. I'd be very surprised if a measurable number of children are taken out of private school and put into the state system. But only time will tell. And the money raised, of course, how far it stretches will depend in part on how big of the burden placed upon the state sector is. But that's not the conversation we were having yesterday. It was a conversation about whether reducing the number of people who enjoy an unfair advantage or who can buy an unfair advantage is actually the preferable path if abolition has been entirely taken off the table. And bizarrely, a headline coming from the Liberal Democrats conference, I think goes into very, very similar territory. But I have less clear views on this because I have less experience of it. Lib Dems to hammer second home owners. Now, pearl clutchers at the Daily Telegraph have understandably got their knickers in a right old twist about this. It is. I think I've only seen it reported there, to be honest with you. But the figures in this are brilliant. I mean, just in terms of wow, you guys are crazy. Liberal Democrats, I think, are a wonderful addition to the public pageant, to the political landscape, and I think that Sir Ed Davey is rebuilding a brand that was damaged. I mean, enormously damaged by the coalition government's decision to abolish Liberal Democrat election pledges on tuition fees. It was a trade-off. In the great scheme of things, it was a trade-off. They got some of the stuff that they wanted, but in return for that, they had to do some of the stuff that they'd promised not to do. Such is the nature of coalition. But I think they blew it. I think getting a referendum on electoral reform just sort of seemed to hypnotise them. And then they lost it, of course. So anyway, I think Ed Davey is rebuilding the brand, as it were, or the political credibility of the Liberal Democrats. Town halls under a Liberal Democrat government would be given the power to increase the council tax on second homes by 500%. Now, I have a bit of a problem with policies that look like tinkering around the edges. I sort of think, there's not that much clear blue water between the two parties on that issue. And Labour keep failing to promise that the latest Tory announcement will be reversed. So today I think it's oil fields, isn't it, in the North Sea. So they're giving a commitment to oil fields in the North Sea. And the Labour Party have said we disapprove of it, but we won't withdraw it. And so you've got that sense of that, well, no one's really thumping the table with policies, are they? And then up pop the Liberal Democrats, who, and I don't think anyone takes offence at me saying this, who are unlikely to form the next government, but might be in coalition. They want to bring in 500% increases, or at least give councils the right to give 500% increases in council tax for second homes. It's a publication called Tackling the Housing Crisis. Now, Cornwall, Devon, London is on the list. The number of holiday properties in London. Why would people have a second home in London? Because they spend most of the time in the country side and then come to London for oh, okay. Yeah, all right. So, no, I see. So you've got two homes, and most people would spend most of the time in London and then go to the countryside. Do you notice what I did with the word side there? This is quite an interesting thing about class and codes. So when I first started knocking about with posh people, they often talk about going to the country at the weekend. And the rest of us don't know what they're talking about. Because you think, which country? But they mean the countryside. And I just did it then. Did you notice? I just said, surely you'd have your second home in the country. And then I just added side at the last minute because I remembered that I'm speaking that code. They said, what are you doing this week? Oh, we're going to the country. And I'd say, which country? What do you're going to the country? Did you know this already? Did you know that this is what posh people do? Where are you going? Did you know this? Did you know this? That this is what, where are you going at the weekend? Going to the country. Don't forget your shotguns. We're going to the country. And I said, what do you mean you're going to the... So the country could mean anything from Yorkshire to Cornwall. It usually sort of means Hampshire, doesn't it? Or the home counties, as we call them. But we're going to the country. So you'd think, we're going to the country as well. We should meet up. But no, you don't understand. We're going to be in Somerset and you're going to be in Yorkshire. But we're both going to the country. We're going to the country at the weekend. So anyway, that's just a little bit of an aside. The notion of these areas, which I'm not overly familiar with. Actually, that's not true. I know Norfolk quite well, but I don't know that Norfolk is ever on these lists because I think perhaps because the problem is less acute with locals not being able to get onto the property ladder. But it's usually Cornwall, Devon, London and the Lake District that are cited in these cases. And in fact, those are the four locales which are named in this publication, Tackling the Housing Crisis, which they have unveiled at the Lib Dem conference this week. So it is described by the Telegraph as a sweeping tax raid on second home owners designed to control the number of holiday properties in areas such as Cornwall, Devon, London and the Lake District if we were to get into power. So councils would have powers to levy twice the normal council tax rate on properties used as a second home, and they'd be allowed to increase it by as much as 5 times. So question number 1 is, how big a problem is it? I genuinely don't know. And I want you to describe to me how it has impacted upon you. So you are a habitual resident, an indigenous resident of Cornwall, but your likelihood or your children's likelihood of living anywhere near where they grew up has been comprehensively reduced, but definitely by second homes rather than just by property prices. Possibly it's a little bit naive to suggest that they're two different things. I'm not suggesting that they're two different things. I am suggesting that although they are intertwined, you can have a huge rise in property prices without any of those properties being second homes. So I don't fully understand the issue. 0345 6060 973. John in Ramsgate points out that Blur taught us about big houses in the country. That's it, isn't it? He lives in a house, in a very big house in the country. So what is the issue here? And on top of that, I mean, it's a bit like the Labour's VAT on private schools. It's cutting away at the edges of the wealthy. So how do you define yourself as wealthy? Well, I send my children to private school and we've got a nice house in the country. Okay, I'm going to introduce policies. So a Lib-Lab coalition could introduce policies that mean you can no longer afford to send your children to private school or to have a second home, a holiday home. Therefore, our definition of wealthy changes. So it's as if there is a political mood abroad that recognises the unfair distribution of wealth, but has almost given up on the idea of coming at it from above, i.e. the very wealthiest people, and instead, Labour and Liberal policies look as if they are nibbling away at the bottom of the wealth bit. So imagine a pyramid, right? Can you imagine a pyramid? Now paint the top bit, the little triangle at the top, paint that pink, right? And the rest of the pyramid is grey. So you're looking for a redistribution of wealth. Are you going to go in from the top of the triangle, or are you going to come up underneath? I'm doing some very odd hand gestures if you're enjoying this on YouTube at the moment. I'm even sort of wibbling my fingers like a jellyfish. Are you going to come up underneath the pink triangle? Should have chosen a different colour. Are you going to come up underneath the pink triangle and nibble away at the bottom of the wealth triangle? Because the other story that we were thinking of talking about, and now that I've embarked upon this curious analysis, the Cotswolds are a massive issue, Sharon points out. The other issue is the Tories are doing the opposite. So when the Tories talk about abolishing inheritance tax, they are tickling the top of the triangle, doing even odder hand gestures now, aren't they? They're tickling the top of the triangle because inheritance tax is going to affect hardly anybody. Best case scenario is it's about 4%. It might double. So that's 7 billion quid that they raise at the moment from inheritance tax. So the Tories are coming at the top of the triangle saying, have some more money. You can hold on to more of your money. And the Lib Lab are coming, rather than going after the people with the most, they're going after with the most. I'm using two mosts here for scientific reasons. Rather than going after people with the most, they're going after people with the least most. They're going after the people. So, anyway. Well, actually, I suppose they're going after all of them because you're going to have to pay 500% more council tax, but you're going to be able to afford it anyway. I think I've set that up beautifully. How damaging are holiday homes to your area? I've never asked you that question before, but I'm asking you now. 0345 6060 973. And if you are the proud owner of one, feel free to defend yourself and explain why it would be absolutely appalling of the Liberal Democrats to quintuple what you pay in council tax on your second home. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. If you hit those numbers now, you will get through. Listen, I was prepared for fisticuffs yesterday because there's a curious breed of fellow parent of privately educated children that it insists on denying that there's any unfair advantage involved, which is just counterintuitive. But on this one, I'm a little more nuanced, I think. I don't know that the Liberal Democrats are necessarily barking up the right tree on this. And, of course, it will also apply to second homes in areas... it won't, because it will depend on what the council does. 0345 6060 973. Someone's just pointed out it's going to cost King Charles a lot of money, this, isn't it? Do they pay council tax? Do you pay council tax on Buckingham Palace? I don't even know. You have to presume so. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It is 21 minutes after 12, and I need to add North Norfolk to the list, which is where I would quite like a second home, as long as that's all right with the locals, and apparently it isn't. So at Burnham Market, which is a lovely part of the world, very near the coastline that I love the most in England. I haven't visited all of it, I've got to be honest, but if you gave me the choice of living near the seaside, this is the bit of seaside that I would choose to live near, but they've just voted against it. They had a little sort of referendum, and the result was that they would ban second homes. So any new developments that are being built, they voted in. The parish council took a vote, and it was in favour of stopping homes being turned into holiday lets, or indeed new developments having houses bought by outsiders for occasional use. I suppose Airbnb will be part of this conversation as well, won't it? 22 after 12 is the time. Claire is in Manchester. Claire, what do you reckon?
Hi, good afternoon.
Hello.
Now, I've lived in Manchester for the last 20 years, but I grew up in Fakenham, which is in North Norfolk, so just down the road from Burnham Market.
Yes, I know it well.
And I went to school in Wells. So I'm still in contact with all my family there and people I grew up with.
In Wells, did you say?
Yes, Wells next to sea.
Yeah, no, I know Wells really well. I love it.
Oh, it's my favourite place in the world.
Yes, same here, actually. In fact, I think we're going there. I think we're going there for half term, actually. I could be wrong, but I hope
I'll be
we are.
there as well.
Lovely. I'll give you a wave. We can have a stick of rock.
Walk a dog on the beach.
Yeah, we will as well. Go on.
So the change I've noticed since I left school in the late 90s, it was never busy in the winter, but it was just more steady, and it was mainly day trippers and what have you. But there wasn't a real issue with housing.
Right.
Now, most people I grew up with are really struggling now to stay in the likes of Wells, Fakenham, Sheringham.
Even Fakenham.
Oh yeah,
because you're coming in from the coast, aren't you? When you get to Fakenham, but it's within easy.
It's only about 10 minutes.
Oh, you're right. It's within easy spitting distance, isn't it? You're right. Yes.
Yeah, it's sinking sort of further inland now because it's so expensive on the coast. But people I've grown up with are having to move totally out of the area.
Yeah.
Because there's what's available is stupidly overpriced if there's anything available. So what the local council have brought in there now, the all new builds must be used as a main residence. I 100% agree with.
Have they done that then?
I don't know if it's been finalised yet. I'm just speaking from memory from a couple of months
Quite interesting to police it, wouldn't it? You'd have, I mean, it's all a bit East German. You'd be grassing on your neighbours, counting the number of days that they're there. How confident can we be that it would make a difference, though? Because, I mean...
I think it would...
It's not going to bring prices down.
Really.
Prices aren't going to start coming down, are they? I don't think.
But there would then be housing stock available.
Yes, that's true.
At the moment, there's just nothing available.
Right. Well, they're throwing up houses all the time in Burnham Market.
Have you seen the prices in Burnham Market?
I have, yes. They're absurd. You might as well be in Chiswick for the amount of bang you get for your buck. It is incredible. But so there's two proposals here. The one that if I build a new house, it has to be a permanent residence. I get my head around that. What about sticking 500% council tax rises on people who've already got second homes? That's a different one. That's actually a little bit more of a persecution.
I think that would make a lot of people think twice on the affordability of maintaining those second houses, and hopefully push some people to sell them and bring those houses back onto the market for locals.
What
now,
about
I'm not saying we don't want second home buyers there altogether, because they desperately need tourism.
Yes.
In the winter months, it is very quiet. But it's even more quiet now than it was 20 years ago, and it's because those second homes
don't go up in the winter.
Are empty.
Yeah. Don't go up in the winter. Well, also, and then the other thing you've got is that the business side of it is that these are small businesses, aren't they? If people are renting them out as well as using them themselves, they're as you say, bringing an array of tourists to the area. And if you're going for a week, then you're going to be spending a lot more money than you would be if you lived there for the whole 4 months. So we just have to wait and see how it plays out. But it's going to be quite popular on the ground in all of the areas affected, because it's an artificial inflation of property, isn't it, really?
Yeah, because I mean, at the moment, it's not fair on the locals at all, and they just need to balance it out. So
won't someone think of what about the Farrow and Ball salesman, Claire? What about the Farrow and Ball? The Farrow and Ball paint salesman. What's going to happen to them if we ban second homes in North Norfolk? They're going to be reduced to penury. They're going to be begging outside church. It's going to be. Have you ever heard? Just while I've got you here, have you ever heard of the whoosh?
Whoosh.
Yeah.
The wash.
No, the whoosh.
Oh, the whoosh. No.
I know what the wash is. Someone who lives in Burnham told me a couple of weeks ago that once a year something happens to the tides, and you can get.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it the extra high tide that comes right in?
But if you get in the right bit of the salt marsh by Wells, you can kind of be. It's like almost like a fairground ride. You'll be whooshed. Right, she'd done it.
In so quickly.
That's right, and that it all goes out so quickly. I forget which one it was, but she'd just done it, and it sounded absolutely amazing. It's on my list. It's on my list, Claire.
I'll have to look that up too.
I'll see you at the Chippy then, at half term.
Plattons.
At Plattons. 27 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Anthony's in St Austell, which is smack in the middle of this story. Anthony, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi James. It's I think the main issue is when people are buying houses that would otherwise be used for local families, like 2-bed houses, and then they start Airbnb them. That's directly taking them off the market and putting them into a money-making exercise where people could be using these properties.
Yes.
I lived in Morganpool for 20 years, and that place is now 80% holiday homes. And I'm the chap that phoned up with the ear infection from surfing in the sewage.
Oh, yeah. Are you any better?
I'm better, but my daughter's had 2 weeks off school with a bug she got from the sea, and my boy had nearly a week off.
Oh, God. Oh,
now,
I'm sorry to hear that.
This does kind of lead into it, because the sewage system, like I said, you can't cope. And then in the summer, these 80% houses that are now back. So, yeah, they have to pay their way. If the money goes to the right place.
Yeah, it seems quite straightforward then for a lot of people on the ground. But what about, I can't remember, you just surf for fun, do you? Or was it your business? Were you the fellow that had no, that was someone else who had a little surfing business. There's one in Wells next to sea, actually. It was on the telly the other day. So people rely on the second home market, the holiday home market. So second home's a bit misleading, because most people will be renting it out when they're not using it. And that is bringing in customers for the chip shops and the surf schools and the restaurant, isn't it?
Yeah, and the thing is, you know, I like your little joke about the flower and ball. I'm a painter and decorator, and I've made good money off these people.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
I have made good money off these people. But it's not a get rid of the tourists. It's not a get rid of the soak and hate. If I see one more Tesla, I'm going to scream. It's not about that. It needs to balance out a little bit. I live in St Austell now because Morgan Port is just nowhere near. There's no way I can move back there. No way.
No.
You know.
And that's not, and that feels unfair. But I wonder, would it work? So I can bring in the legislation that means if you're building a housing development, then every single one of your customers has to prove that it's going to be their main residence. But what happens if it isn't? What happens if I change my mind? What happens if I pull the wool over your eyes?
This has happened when there was, you know, these houses for locals, or you have to have a tie to the area. It's happened where people have moved in, you know, in 2 years' time. They've then looked and gone, Christ almighty, look what I can get.
Yes,
you know,
yes, of course.
Holiday Airbnb in this. That pays 10 months mortgage.
Yeah.
You know, so let's go stay in a static caravan for the summer. Let's Airbnb. I can see people doing it. Morally, yes, I think it's wrong. And there has to be a bit more of a balance. The swing has gone way too far the other way.
Fair enough.
You know,
I do. And that's, I mean, it's a Liberal Democrat policy. So the 500% increase in council tax would be helpful as well, because that might price people out of the second home market. And
well, I don't think it will. If we go back to Morgan Porth, the type of people that are in the market to buy a house in Morgan Porth, they've got silly money.
They're going to suck it up, aren't they? So who does it affect?
Exactly. So just suck it up and pay it, so it's a bit more balanced. But then it has to go to the right places.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what I meant about, you know, tinkering at the edges with policies. It's going to have to be meaningful, and it's going to have to be big to make the kind of differences that you described, to get that pendulum swinging back again. It doesn't mean they'll necessarily get it right first time, but there is a sense here that I guess people like me won't be aware of it, because we're part of the problem. You know, whether you own a second home or whether you're borrowing or renting somebody else's when you go to these parts of the world, you feel like you're part of the community. You spend a lot of money, but you don't stop to wonder what it must be like for people whose children are going to have to live 20 miles away. You just sort of crack on. 31 minutes after 12 is the time, and that is bad. That's bad for communities. Reminds me a bit of Notting Hill. I know that sounds a bit daft, but Notting Hill was a really cool place to live when I moved to London, and it was partly a really cool place to live because, at risk of upsetting Suicidal Braverman, because it was so multicultural. But it became such a cool place to live that all the bankers started moving in, and a lot of the coolness of Notting Hill started moving out, me included, because I couldn't afford to stay there. So I guess it's different with the landscape and the seaside, but still the community that makes these places very special gets diluted by their own popularity almost. It's 12:32. I'll stop wibbling now and hand you over to Amelia Cox with the latest headlines. It is 12:37 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I don't know why. The paper just fell open on this page. I'm looking at talks of psychedelic retreats in the Netherlands or Jamaica. Guess how much a 6-day psychedelic retreat costs? £4,000. £4,000. Keith said, that's high, which is a very good pun, you see. Psychedelic retreat. Well played, Keith. And of course, we're talking about holiday homes and whether or not it is time to rein them in. Because as with the conversation about private education yesterday, you'd rein them in, but not for everyone. So you'd still have... Anyway, I'm just interested in how big a problem it is and what we think about the idea of making it harder to own one, harder to have one. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Tom says, I live in Cornwall. The amount of friends and family who've left due to house prices, which are directly affected by home purchase, is criminal. My wife and I are lucky enough to have bought our first home recently, but not in our hometown, because it's simply unaffordable. And I suppose if I was in devil's advocate mood today, which I'm not, I'd say, what difference does it make whether it's your first home or your second home? Loads of people have been priced out of their home territories in the southeast. Loads of people, I got priced out of Notting Hill. Loads of people have been priced out of where they might have wanted to buy a house. We're all priced out of Belgravia, aren't we? We're all priced out of Mayfair. What difference does it make if it's your first home or your second home that's priced? It's about how many people want to live somewhere. It's supply and demand. Demand is really high because it's a beautiful part of the world, whether it's your first home or your second home. I could make that argument. I don't think I'd mean it, but I could make it, and I'd be interested what your response would be. But anyway, Naz is in Enfield. Not many people have got a second home in Enfield, Naz, surely.
No, but what I was going to say is that we've got a one-bedroom flat in north of Cardiff because my kids were priced out of London, so they went to Wales.
Oh, and you've got a flat to stay in when you go and see them.
Yes, and look after the children.
Yes.
And we're getting taxed. We're getting taxed by the local government because it's counted as a second home. We took all our savings to buy this place, and we're getting taxed. It's a second home.
What's the rate then in Wales? Have Wales already got legislation in place on this?
Yes.
What do you pay?
It's double.
So if it was your permanent residence, you'd pay half the council tax that you pay now?
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting.
And Wales have all done it, and I think it's really unfair because it's all our savings. We're not going and we're not renting it out as a beauty spot, a second place. So they've already done it, and they don't take in individual circumstances.
Well, they can't though, can they? They can't really take individual circumstances.
Well, I suppose so. But when you think it's, that it just is, maybe a kick in the teeth when you're trying to do the right
people
thing.
listening to this have an image of some Tesla driving city boy tooling up the motorway to the Cotswolds where he parks up for the weekend and smokes a fat cigar, whereas what you're describing is a purchase made, almost through necessity and not comfortably, and using up all your savings, and partly for childcare reasons. So it's the opposite of what the stereotype second homeowner looks like.
Yes, that's why I wanted to make that point, that it shouldn't be a blanket thing.
No.
Yes.
But how would we do it, though? Would we send around the second home inspectors, and then you would... Is your flat in an area where second homes are popular? Is it like around Penarth? Is it on the coast?
No, it's north of Cardiff. It's called Nantgarrow. Most people haven't heard of it. It's in a quiet, but it's not. It's north of Cardiff. It's a very quiet place.
Right.
And we haven't purchased anybody. We haven't.
You don't think you've pushed anyone out of the housing market by buying it? But so is the rule in place?
There are a lot of council houses there, actually. A lot of council there. So it's not a rich area at all, but we haven't priced anybody out.
No.
And I'm just trying to show that there is another side. Of course, there's a side when people are making money off it, and, but I think it has to be looked at, if possible.
Yes, I think, well, you might be right. And so is it across all of Wales then? I'm so bad at this, Naz. It's because all the papers are printed in London. I didn't know they've already done it in Wales.
Yes, so all local authorities, apart from two, have done this policy.
Well,
it was supposed to. So, I think just because they haven't got money, it's a money-making policy. They've been cut to the. It's a money-making policy. So yes, so Wales have done it already. And when I heard 500%, I was thinking, oh, gosh, I hope they don't go on that bandwagon.
Well, let's hope they're not listening, eh?
Yeah.
None of the Labour politicians in Wales are listening. Thank you, Naz. You make a really valid point, actually, rather better than I managed to when I was talking about pink triangles and ticklish fingers, coming at people from the bottom of the wealth peak rather than coming at people from the top. But how do you come at people from the top? Well, you increase inheritance tax. The Tories are doing the exact opposite, or you bring in some sort of asset tax, a flat tax, a windfall tax. I don't know. I'm just going to address a direct question from Dave. He says, I've never been to a book signing before, but I've booked a ticket for your show in Manchester on the 28th of November. It might seem like a silly question, but does the ticket price include a copy of the book to be signed at the event? If not, do I need to order one from Waterstones to be collected at the event? Well, I don't know, Dave, because there was an option on the site. It's sold out now, Manchester. There was an option on the site to either buy a ticket with a book or to buy just a book. I think they're about 20 quid each. So depending on how much you paid, there will or will not be a book included. But I'll definitely be signing them after the show. 12:43 is the time. They're all sold out now, apart from Southampton, where even if it is sold out, I'm going to pretend that it isn't, because people find it so funny when I complain about Southampton not having sold out. It's nearly sold out in Southampton, so hurry if you do want to come along. I'm also doing a couple in Scotland. You can see the details of that. I'm doing the Hay Winter Festival. I'm doing the Cheltenham Literary Festival as well, if you want to come and see me at any of those to discuss my new book. Rhian is in Gwynedd in North Wales, which is quite appropriate given where Naz was talking about. Rhian, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Rhian.
Sorry. Rhian's a female name.
I know. I've just corrected it. I don't know why. I thought Rhian. Apologies, Rhian.
Rhian, yes. Going after the last caller who said it's unfair to tax them. What's more unfair is that the housing market in Wales has been decimated by capitalism, because since Margaret Thatcher privatised a hell of a lot of things, since then, house prices have boomed everywhere, and especially in Wales, where we're competing with prices in England. And obviously, most of the population in Britain lives in England. So when these buyers find a new house, obviously they find places on the coasts. And the most popular area, most Welsh speakers in Wales live in northwest Wales, and in a village called Abbot.
Yes.
It's so popular with second home owners that a local school was shut down because not enough parents were able to live there.
Wow. So these are, they're big issues then. It's not just, you think of a holiday home as being a sort of a frilly little issue, but it's a big issue for the people in the areas where it is not a holiday home, it's a home. It's a really, really big deal.
It's a serious problem, and when it comes to...
but Welsh councils already have the right to bump up council tax by 300%, I'm being told by my...
Yes, that is a very, very new policy that's just come out, because it's when the last caller said it's a money-making scheme, it's not. What it is people are trying to understand that it's actually destroying Welsh culture.
God, that's a really powerful point, because it is the Welsh language areas and the people moving in who will have no intention of learning Welsh are pricing out people who would pass it on to future generations. Thank you, Rhian. That's, I'm glad we did this rather than inheritance tax. It was a toss-up between the two, because I felt I can't do both. It's the same subject in a way. And very similar to yesterday's conversation about private education, but this is more interesting to me. 1246, the psychology of inheritance tax is interesting. So we might do that tomorrow. What a time to be alive. It is 12:50. Claire says there's no such thing as a second home. A home is where you live, and no one can live in two places. It's immoral when people are homeless. Gosh, I hadn't thought of it like that, actually. I disagree with the first bit. I think you can have two homes. You feel equally at home in both of them. It's a weird sort of duality, possibly something to do with boarding school. The weirdest thing about boarding school was that within an hour of getting home, you sort of felt that you hadn't been away. And within an hour of getting back to school for the start of a new term, you sort of felt that you hadn't been home. You did have two sort of existences almost. I think you can do that with second homes. I don't know, really. And it looks like Southampton is sold out. I know how closely you follow the excitement surrounding the imminent publication of my new book, How They Broke Britain. But would you believe that it has links to the place where Suella Braverman gave her speech yesterday? Actually, this is what I meant when I told you a while ago that I've got to stop writing it now, because otherwise it's never going to end. Every week something happens which would actually fit in the How They Broke Britain narrative. But Braverman features quite heavily. The introduction is Braverman and Raab, not because they are responsible for breaking Britain, but they are proof of how broken it is. So I use Dominic Raab and Suella Braverman as evidence of how utterly corrupted our political system is, because two people like that could rise to the highest offices in the land. Obviously, Johnson drives that point home completely in Chapter 9, but the introduction is looking at symptoms more than causes. And you would struggle to find two better examples of how utterly broken normal politics was by, in this case, Brexit and the lies of Boris Johnson that Brexit ushered in than the appointment of Dominic Raab and Suella Braverman to key roles. I thought that they might both be toast by the time the book came out. Raab's resignation came in time for inclusion, but I thought Braverman might be toast as well. She still might. This speech that she's given in America is disgusting, deliberately disgusting, but Rishi Sunak seems to be lacking vertebrae, doesn't he, when it comes to actually disciplining members of his team. So but the place where she gave the speech has relevance to 2 or 3 different chapters of the book, which is really interesting because it's all about the unseen and sometimes seen links between secretly funded think tanks, right-wing media and the Conservative Party. And yesterday's speech by Suella Braverman absolutely nailed all 3 of those points, which would have been a useful culmination of the introduction if it wasn't for the fact that the book was already at the printers before she did it. 12:53 is the time. To answer Sarah's question, yes, there is a waiting list for cancelled tickets for the book tour. If you go on the website, there's a link on my Twitter, then you can join the waiting list to pick up any returns. And there might be a few more coming up in Northampton, depending on concrete issues. They're refurbishing the theatre. There may be some. If it's finished in time, we'll be able to put a few more on up for sale. Richard's on the Isle of Wight, where second homes abound. Richard, what would you like to say?
You mentioned Braverman, then it took me off my stroke. I remember not to
Just behave yourself.
Not to swear.
Yes, if you would. Thank you.
I mean, going back to the lady who bought the flat in Wales,
yes.
I think the important thing is that she's bought an asset.
Yes.
She could be paying for a hotel.
That's true.
So paying double or 3 times. And the issue in Wales is they have done that, and it's only reduced second ownership by about 7%. But enough of Wales, let's talk about the Isle of Wight.
Yes.
I spend a lot of my time as a local councillor dealing solely with housing issues of people that are being ejected for properties that are becoming Airbnbs or landlords are selling or whatever else, and it has quite a big knock-on effect. And we have to try and think of it like a buffet or school dinners, is that no one should get a second plate in terms of a second home until everyone's had their first plate.
Yeah.
It's a bit like wealth. I have no issue with people being wealthy, but when we've got extreme wealth, no one should be poor. And you know this better than I do. But the numbers on the island are we've got 2,400 households on the housing waiting list.
Right.
And we've got 2,500 Airbnbs and about 1,000 second homes. And it's not debt related. I know you don't just sell an Airbnb and it becomes available because there's all sorts of issues.
No, but those numbers are striking, aren't they? They are.
They are. And the knock-on is that pre-COVID, a nice 3-bedroom house in a nice town like Cowes would have cost you about 950 quid a month rent.
Right.
If you're canny, you probably had three properties to choose from. If you're canny, you'd probably knock the rent down by 50 quid a month.
Yeah.
That same house now is 1,350 quid a month, and it's disappeared.
Why?
Because you've had...
Why this post-pandemic explosion? Why this post-pandemic...
Hopefully this next figure explains it, is there used to be, on a churn, 300 houses a month available for rent on the Isle of Wight.
Are you in the business? You sound like you're in the property.
No. I'm a local councillor.
Then you are in the business, but not from a commercial angle. Then.
No. I also own a fish and chip shop. Your point about fish and chip shop being busier is and isn't the case. But anyway, that's for a different day. So there was 300 properties available for rent a month pre-COVID.
Yeah.
Now there's only 80 a month. So you can see in terms of an order of magnitude why that makes it difficult.
Is this because people changed their priorities during lockdown and decided that they would spend more of their time in the Isle of Wight? Because you say Airbnb, Airbnb, but it will also be inhabited by the owners for a lot of the year.
Some are, some aren't.
Yes, of course.
And what it is what you had during COVID was you had a lot of people who were perhaps on furlough or on full pay working from home in a city or wherever, who all of a sudden had excess cash because they couldn't spend it. You had business people being given grants.
Yes.
And, and this conversation could go on for days, but I'll keep it short. But, we've got fairly poor pension provision in this country. So people go, hang on, I've got £50,000-60,000 I've never had before. That's enough for deposit on a house on the island. I can rent it out for 6 weeks a year, use it the rest of the time, and it's an asset. It's my pension. And that's not anecdotal. That's what we've seen happen.
Of course it is.
way you were talking about inheritance tax.
What's the policy what's the policy for your council? Is it right, normal council tax for second homes?
So no council in the UK can do anything until the levelling up bill goes through Parliament.
I thought Welsh councils have already done stuff, or am I being misinformed?
Different country.
You said the UK. You said the UK.
Sorry, I did indeed. In England. My mistake. Fine. Sorry, I'm glad you corrected me.
No, that's what I'm
England,
here for.
It just sounded like it's that conversation with my wife. In England, we can't do anything until that bill's passed. Then we have the option to double council tax on second homes and holiday homes.
Okay. And are you planning to, do you think? Or was that...
Yeah, we did have a little pre-vote in council, and there was some objectors, but not many.
You got an idea on it?
Yeah, and the reason being is that, we've lost £93 million a year in council funding. The £2 or £3 million a year that raises builds the social housing we need. It starts to make a huge difference. You've talked many times about how on a knife-edge local councils are, and I can't explain to you how is exactly. Yeah.
And so even if it doesn't have a measurable impact on locals being able to get back into the housing ladder, it will have a measurable impact on how much money you've got to spend as a council.
Exactly that. And if we can start building 200-300 affordable and social homes a year, from the numbers I gave you, in a relatively few number of years, you start to give people hope of owning their own front door.
I like it. No, I like it, and it's important. And in fact, the numbers for first-time buyers have gone through the floor today. I think it's down about 22%, which is going to be partly relevant to what we're talking about. Before you go, where's the chippy?
It's in Cowes High Street. The only one left in Cowes High Street.
What's it called?
Corrie's Cabin.
Right, I'll be there. So next time I'm on the island, I'll be in Corrie's Cabin. I'd travel a long way for good fish and chips. Probably further than is healthy. Let me read this out, because I didn't think you're a bad person. It goes, you sell books for extra money, James. I rent out a second house to top up my pension. Why am I a bad person? I don't think you're a bad person, but the reason why these two events are economically different is every time I write a book, there's not a first-time author out there who loses his book deal, you see. So it's slightly different. If I write a book, it doesn't mean you can't. Whereas if you own two homes, I can't own the second one. That's all. So I don't think you're a bad person. I don't know where you got that idea, but I'm happy to help. And of course, to surreptitiously mention my book again, which is very important. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, Rewind Live Radio, or enjoy the whole show podcast. I really fancy fish and chips now, but I've got to go and record a podcast. You'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as stay up to date with the latest news from LBC. Rewind Live Radio on Global Player. Download for free from your app store, or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Sawbrick with you at 4. Sheila Fogarty with you now.
Am I going to get a free copy of this book, or are you going to make me buy one?
Of course you can have a free copy.
I was tweeting the hell out of it before publication.
There it is. No, absolutely, you can. It's not out until November the 2nd.
Oh, okay.
No, so you can have it then.
Thank you.
All right.
Will you get someone nice to sign it for me?
Yeah, I will. Keith. Keith is doing signed copies.
Thank you. I look forward to that. Early Christmas present. 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 To that. Early